You were telling me the other day how much you enjoyed a good survival against all odds type of story.
I do.
And so I've got one for you. You ready?
Absolutely.
I'm going to set the scene. You're standing on the deck of a small rusty barge somewhere off the coast of Russia.
Okay.
The sea is cold. It's gray. Its wilderness is just stretching to the edge of the world. And it's like every gust of wind feels like an icy slap in the face. Now, you're not Thor Heyerdahl. You're not some adventurer. You're not a hero. You're not even a sailor. You're just a guy in a barge, and you've been blown out to sea. And it's not really a barge. It's more like a floating dumpster. And it was used for Russian naval exercises.
Okay.
All right. After the exercise, you're being towed back to port in the middle of a storm, and suddenly the tow line snaps without warning, and you and your crewmates who had gone out to connect the dumpster target with a tow line are still in the barge. The tow line breaks and you're set adrift in the unforgiving Pacific Ocean with barely enough supplies to survive a weekend, let alone make an odyssey. You've got no map, no radio, nothing but howling wind and the gnawing realization that you might just vanish into the sea. Just another nameless story swallowed by the waves. It was 1960, and the Cold War is in full swing. So America and the Soviet Union, they were pretty much staring each other down. It was not an era of cooperation.
It wasn't a chummy time.
It was not a chummy time. Now, right off the coast of Russia's Kamchatka Peninsula, there was this little barge. It was called the T-36. Now, it wasn't a noble battleship or a sleek submarine. It was a target ship, a small, unassuming barge whose sole purpose was to sit off the coast. And this would be during naval exercises. And they would shoot at it with their battleships. It was like a giant dumpster with holes shot through it. And the crewman's job was to retrieve the barge after the target practice and attach it to the tow line. Now, there were 5 of them in this. But life had different plans for the T-36 and its crew of 5 Soviet sailors. Once the vicious storm rolled in, the tow line broke, and they were set to sea, and they were at the hands. Well, it was the whole angry sea god package, which
Sure.
I'm assuming is, optional for an additional charge. The barge, towed by the larger ship, disappeared slowly over the horizon. For some reason, they didn't notice, or they couldn't get back to get them. But suddenly, this little steel bathtub with 5 guys on board were at the mercy of the Pacific Ocean. Again, not hardened mariners. These were just 5 guys who knew how to tie knots.
They're boat retrievers.
They were boat retrievers. They had nothing with them but a little bit of bread, some lard, and a handful of potatoes. And it's true, you and I, Kat, have been in Airbnb rentals with worse provisions, but at least we had Wi-Fi. What followed was pure hell. The crew had no proper navigational equipment. They couldn't steer it. They had to ration everything, including their sanity. They collected rainwater, fished with anything that they could MacGyver together. And when things got really dire, they even drank a little bit of seawater, which usually leads to more hallucinations than hydration. They didn't even have a good idea of which way was home. There was no propulsion system. It was like being lost in the biggest, wettest parking lot in the world. And every space is taken up by Soviet existential crisis. So with no rescue in sight, they started to ration their food.
Sure.
They eked out tiny portions of bread and lard. When the water ran low, they did collect some rainwater and anything they could find, even little bottle caps. That's how desperate they were.
Yeah.
And as the day turned into weeks, the T-36 drifted further and further into the vast Pacific.
Ugh.
That is my worst nightmare, is to be stranded at sea in a floating dumpster, or really just anything. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. It's not ideal. That's for sure.
At this point, they weren't just lost. They were officially nature's free-floating experiment. They were able to improvise some fishing gear. They managed to catch a couple of fish, and that helped them with their much-needed protein.
Mm-hmm. And you said they had potatoes.
They did have some potatoes and a little bit of lard and a small loaf of bread.
Okay. Well, I mean, if they have potatoes, they're fine.
If they have enough.
Matt Damon showed us that you can...
That's true.
You can make do with just a few potatoes.
You can make doo-doo and then make potatoes.
Yep.
So the only thing they had to stay warm, they had a couple of wool blankets. Can you imagine how comfortable those were, soaking wet in the freezing North Pacific? So they huddled together and tried to stay warm any way they could. And to keep their spirits up, they probably told each other everything was going to be fine. But I'm picturing, like, as soon as, one of them said that, they turned their head and rolled their eyes like, we are so screwed. I can't imagine how quickly depression and anxiety would set in. Somehow they managed to keep it together. There were no mutinies, no Lord of the Flies crap, just stubborn, sheer willpower. And I'm assuming maybe they got together at the beginning and made some kind of agreement that they wouldn't need each other. I would want, that sort of an agreement going forward. The ocean, in its twisted generosity, occasionally coughed up some gifts, driftwood, bits of debris, things they could use to make makeshift repairs, but still no ships passed by. No rescue came. The barge became a speck in the middle of nowhere. And then after 49 days, salvation came. They had drifted nearly across the entire Pacific Ocean.
Whoa.
An American aircraft on patrol, it was just a routine patrol, spotted the T-36 drifting off the coast of the United States. That must have been weird because, again, you're in the middle, it's the Cold War. And you're flying a plane and the conversation in the cockpit. Hey, that looks like a Soviet barge. Shouldn't that be kind of not there? And the U.S. Navy dispatched a ship to investigate. And initially they were suspicious, of course.
Sure.
This was a time of espionage and, well, it still is, but it was...
It was more secret espionage.
This was the time with the U-2 airplane and all kinds of high-altitude balloons trying to gather any kind of information from each other.
Yeah, and the U-2 airplanes, we hear about all the time flying overhead, and it's like, I haven't found one. Right? That's what it's like.
The U.S. Navy dispatched a ship to investigate, and they found the 5 sailors still alive. 49 days.
That's
remember.
Amazing.
They were starved. They were weather-beaten, and I would imagine shell-shocked. It's amazing to me that all 5 of them survived after 49 days.
Yeah.
So in a surprising twist, instead of turning this into some kind of a Cold War standoff, it became a rare moment of humanity. The sailors, the Americans treated I use the word sailors. They were not tying guys. They treated them well. They fed them. And after a brief diplomatic back and forth, they sent them home.
Nice.
They didn't try to hold them hostage. They didn't try to use them to negotiate anything. They pulled them out of the water. They cleaned them up. They fed them and then sent them home. And when the crew returned to the Soviet Union, they were met like heroes. Accidental heroes, but heroes nonetheless. They had survived 7 weeks on the open sea with almost nothing. The story of the T-36 became a symbol of Soviet resilience and maybe a cautionary tale for future barge crews. Always double check that tow line. It's also a story of humanity. It's so bizarre. This little barge, this dumpster with holes shot in it, and 5 guys just drift from the Soviet Union to right off the coast of California.
Wow.
It's a Soviet ghost ship washing up on American shores, more or less. Not with spies or missiles, but just 5 dudes and some potatoes. Must have
I
been
can't
like
imagine there was much left for potatoes.
No, probably not. That must have been the worst cruise ever. We've been on a couple of bad ones, but holy crap. It's a story of endurance, of human grit, and most of all, humanity. At a time when you wouldn't expect that sort of behavior between those two superpowers. There were bizarre detours that took place, and this is what sometimes happens in history. The most unlikely of events. Washing up near America during the Cold War, I would think this would make an amazing Tom Hanks movie.
Ooh, you're not wrong.
Like a combination of Castaway and Bridge of Spies. It'd be perfect.
It's true.
The beauty of this story for me is that sometimes the true stories are the most bizarre ones, even more bizarre than fiction in some cases. And I think the takeaway from all of this is this reminder. The next time that you feel adrift in life, remember you could be in an oversized dumpster shot full of holes, cresting large waves somewhere in the vast Pacific, just leaning on a rusty side rail, staring at that endless horizon and hoping the lard sandwiches don't run out so that your crewmates don't eat you.
Yeah, no, that is a great lesson, and I believe I've seen that needle pointed.
At least your commute only feels like 1,200 miles. Whew. My source is the Soviet barge T-36's incredible journey from maritimehistory.org. 49 days adrift, the story of the T-36, coldwarmariners.com, and Soviet sailors rescued by U.S. Navy from the Pacific Archives.gov.
Wow. That's pretty impressive.
I think the biggest part of overcoming a situation as dire as this has to be 100%, well, not 100%, but certainly a high percentage of just mental approach to it and trying to keep your spirits up. I mean, I have a hard time keeping my spirits up when the power goes out.
Mm-hmm.
But
this is true.
These guys were eating lard sandwiches and floating. I mean, I get seasick just looking off the edge of a railing.
Yeah, I don't think that it's any, I don't think there's any question that you would not deal well with this kind of scenario.
Mm-mm. I would not deal well with that. I have to admit, although I've never been tested in a situation like that. So maybe I would be able to reach deep down inside and find my inner dumpster riding, lard sandwich eating hero.
Huh? Hey, could you try like reaching down inside the next time like the internet doesn't work and see if you can like hero it up then a little bit? Yeah.
I'll try.
Okay.
I'll try.